think I was 16 years old and my buddy called and he said, hey, you want to come check out this fighting gym when you come back? It was in the summer. I was like, sure. But I went down, I was 16, went down and I think we did some kickboxing or something. Literally remember going in and just never stopped going. So I started kickboxing. So it was 4-0 kickboxing and then I turned 18 and I never lost. So I was undefeated at that point, went into MMA. And I remember going into my first MMA fight. I fought a guy who was 40 years old. His name was Stein Anderson. It's on YouTube. You can go check it out. The very first punch I ever threw was a spinning back fist in the first like 10 seconds, and I dropped him with it. And I knew going into that fight, I was like, I'm gonna throw a spinning back fist. I'm gonna circle him this way, and I'm gonna throw it and land it. I didn't finish him though. He got back up. I ended up head kicking him in the second round and TKOing him, knocking him out. And I remember going into that fight for whatever reason. In my mind, if I lost that fight, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna fight anymore. Like I'm gonna have to work, I'm gonna have to get a job. So I ended up winning that fight, fought again, and I'd fight back-to-back weekends, 3 weekends in a row sometimes. So ended up having like 14 MMA fights, 4 kickboxing fights, a couple boxing fights. But I moved down to Phoenix when I was 19 years old. Tim actually, he was commentating a fight back in Great Falls where Tim's from. At that point I had learned a little bit of jiu-jitsu. I knew like a decent arm bar, decent triangle, like I knew more about the basics. Tim didn't know much about me at the time, but he knew the kid I was fighting. He was a college wrestler, like a pretty strong wrestler, and I was just a scrappy kid. I was skinny, scrappy, I just fought. I didn't really know the techniques. But I ended up arm barring this kid and I popped his arm. And I won the fight via armbar in an after party. Tim was already living in Phoenix training at the lab. He's like, hey dude, if you want to train at a real gym, I see like potential in you. You can come down for a couple days and train and check out a real gym. I went to practice and I'd never wrestled a day in my life. And the lab, a lot of them come from wrestling backgrounds. So it was bad. Like I was getting, every single practice I left crying. I was like, holy shit, I don't know if like I can do this. But for whatever reason, I had that mindset. I had those initial thoughts, but I kept pushing forward. I kept like, for some reason, I wanted to keep going. I knew like if I practiced, I could be better. I could beat these guys, but they just knew more than me, and they were better than me at that time. So I kept going for 10 days, and then I flew back home. At that point, I wanted to be in the UFC. I was like, that's where I need to be if I want to be in the UFC. So I went back home, got a full-time job, saved up $2,000, and I drove 20 hours straight from Helen, Montana to Phoenix, and knocked on Tim's door, and I was there, and that's what started my Phoenix lifestyle. So.